Welcome back to the Conviction Fiction Podcast. Welcome back to the Conviction Fiction Podcast, where we challenge the stories that keep us trapped long after the bars are gone. Now, today's episode is for the people who believe they're doing well simply because they're no longer doing bad. Let that sink in first, right? You think you changed because you stopped making mistakes, but silence isn't growth, it's just a hiding place. Staying out of trouble doesn't mean you redeemed yourself. It means you're stagnant. In this episode, we're dismantling the passive good person myth and revealing why doing nothing is actually dangerous. One of the biggest lies we tell ourselves after surviving something difficult, whether it's incarceration, addiction, betrayal, or trauma, or just years of poor decisions, is that the absence of destruction automatically equals transformation. We stop drinking. We stop stealing. We stop lying. We stop getting arrested. We stop cheating. However, with all that being said, somewhere along the way, we started handing ourselves trophies for inactivity. We convinced ourselves that just because we're not creating new damage, we're somehow creating something new, new value. But that's not how growth works. A tree doesn't become healthy because it stopped dying. It becomes healthy because it starts growing. There's a difference. And that difference changes everything. I've met people who've been home for prison for 10 years or more who are still living emotionally in their release paperwork. Their entire identity is built around what they don't want to do anymore. I don't hang around those people. I don't break laws. I don't get into trouble. I don't use drugs. That's all wonderful. But what do you do? Who are you becoming? What are you building? Who are you serving? Whose life is better because you exist? Because redemption isn't measured by the damage you stop causing, it's measured by the healing you intentionally create. That's a hard truth. And that's something that we're going to deal with today on this show. Because at the end of the day, we are changing the narrative. And it's especially hard because passivity feels safe. Nobody criticizes the man who sits quietly in the corner. Nobody questions the person who keeps their head down. Nobody notices the individual who simply avoids conflict. But hidden underneath that safety is a dangerous question. What if you're not healing? What if you're hiding? What if your version of being good is actually fear wearing a respectable suit? We're going there today. And if this episode punches you in the chest a little bit, understand that it punched me first because I've lived this. There were seasons in my own life where I confused staying out of trouble with becoming a better man. I thought avoiding mistakes was enough. I thought surviving was enough. I thought being harmless was enough. And it wasn't. It wasn't at all. And maybe it isn't for you either. Before we jump in, if you are trying to build a life that goes beyond mere survival, check out my devotional book, No Turning Back. It's a daily challenge to stop living in yesterday's mistakes and start walking intentionally towards purpose. Because redemption was never meant to be passive. Let's get into it. There's a dangerous kind of peace that looks healthy from the outside, but is actually killing you from the inside. It's the peace of inactivity, the peace of keeping your head down, the peace of staying out of trouble, the peace of never taking risk or becoming so focused on avoiding mistakes that you stop pursuing purpose altogether. And if we're being honest, a lot of us have mistaken that peace for personal redemption, especially those of us who have survived difficult chapters in our lives. Maybe you've come home from prison. Maybe you recovered from addiction. Maybe you've rebuilt your life after divorce or escaped toxic relationships. Or maybe you just simply reached a point where you're tired of chaos. So you make a decision. No more drama, no more problems. I'm making it a basic life choice to not make any more mistakes. Now that sounds healthy and it becomes your entire identity. There's a difference between healing and hiding. There's a difference between wisdom and withdrawal. There's a difference between peace and paralysis. The passive good person doesn't necessarily wake up and decide to waste his or her life. That's not how it happens. Instead, they slowly begin building a life centered around avoidance. You avoid difficult conversations. You avoid leadership opportunities. You avoid vulnerability. You avoid accountability. Any challenge that might expose a weakness, you avoid. And because you're no longer causing obvious damage, everyone, including yourself, begins to applaud this performance that you're putting on. People say things to you like, man, you really changed, or you stay out of trouble now and you're doing so well. And maybe compared to who you used to be, that's all true. But redemption isn't a comparison game. Your future cannot be measured solely against your worst decisions. Imagine a man who spent years destroying relationships through anger. Then one day he decides he's done arguing, no more arguing. Sounds great. But what if he also stops communicating? What if he never apologizes? What if he never rebuilds trust? What if he never learns emotional intelligence? What if he simply withdraws? From the outside, it looks like growth because the exposures stop. They don't happen like that no more. But internally, the dysfunction remains untouched. The problem didn't just all of a sudden disappear, it just became quieter. Many people spend years becoming quieter versions of their dysfunction instead of transformed versions of themselves. And because society often celebrates harmlessness, we rarely challenge it. We've created an environment where people confuse being non threatening with being virtuous. But those are two completely different things. A man can be harmless because he's wise. A man can also be harmless because he's afraid. And those motivations matter. Fear disguised as maturity is still fear. Think about the phrase, I just mind my business. Now, sometimes that's wisdom. Sometimes that's exactly what you should do, right? Just mind your business. However, other times it's a shield that protects us from responsibility, a shield that allows us to witness suffering without involvement, a shield that lets us watch problems unfold while convincing ourselves we're somehow morally neutral. The truth is, neutrality is one of the greatest illusions ever sold to human beings. You are never truly neutral. You're either contributing to growth or allowing decay. You're either building something or neglecting something. You're either healing wounds or permitting them to happen. You're either developing character or maintaining comfort. There's no spiritual cruise control in this. There's no emotional parking gear. There's no autopilot. The moment you stop intentionally growing, you become a drifter. You begin to unintentionally drift. And drift is dangerous because it feels peaceful. Nobody notices drift at first. Take into account a ship, like big cruise ship on the ocean. It doesn't suddenly find itself hundreds of miles off course. It moves 1 degree at a time. And that one missed opportunity, one avoided conversation at a time, the postponed act of courage that you should have done, or making excuses. Eventually, you wake up and realize years have passed. You realize your ship has went off course. You're not causing problems, but you're not creating purpose either. You're existing, not living, surviving, not growing, just breathing, not becoming. And that's why so many people reach middle age carrying a strange emptiness they can't even explain. They did everything they were supposed to do, stayed out of trouble, kept their head down, paid the bills, avoided drama. Yet something still feels missing because human beings were never designed merely to avoid evil. We were designed to actively pursue good. That's a massive difference. One requires restraint, the other one requires courage. One you can be okay hiding. The other one is going to take a little bit of engagement. You can ask yourself, how do I avoid making things worse or be more engaged and say, how do I make things better? And that second question changes everything. It's the question that forces growth. It's the question that destroys complacency. It's the question that dismantles the passive good person myth once and for all. Because eventually every person must confront an uncomfortable truth. The goal of life is not to become someone who causes less damage. The goal of life is to become someone who creates more healing. And healing requires movement. Healing requires action. It requires presence. It takes you to be courageous, which leads us directly into the next trap that keeps so many people stuck. It's an avoidant mindset because inactivity rarely starts with laziness. More often, it starts with fear. Now, the avoidant mindset is the most dangerous prison that you could be in because we got to remember prisons aren't just made of concrete. Sometimes prisons aren't surrounded by razor wire. You don't have to have a guard standing at towers to be in prison. The most dangerous prison is the one that convinces you you're free while quietly keeping you stuck. That's the avoidant mindset. And the scary part is that most people don't even realize they're living inside of it because avoidance rarely looks dramatic. Avoidance doesn't always look like running away. Sometimes avoidance looks responsible. Sometimes it looks patient. Sometimes it even looks mature. But underneath the surface, avoidance is often just fear wearing a respectable mask. The passive good person tells himself or herself that they're being careful. It tells them that they're waiting for the right time. It tells them that they're healing. It tells them that they're staying focused. But years go by and nothing changes. The same wounds remain. The same conversations never happen. The same relationships stay broken. The same dreams stay parked in neutral. The same fears remain untouched. And all the while, we mistake inactivity for progress. One of the greatest traps people fall into after making major life mistakes is becoming obsessed with not making another mistake. Now, it sounds logical at first. If you've spent years making poor decisions, naturally you want to stop making them. But eventually, that mindset becomes a cage because when your primary goals become avoiding failure, you automatically stop pursuing growth. Think about it. You don't apply for the promotion at your work at your job because you might get rejected. You don't start the business because you think it might fail. You don't apologize because the person might not forgive you. You don't pursue the relationship because your heart might get broken again. You don't tell your story because people might judge you, or mentor others because you're afraid you're not qualified, or lead someone because leadership comes with criticism. And before long, your life becomes centered around risk avoidance instead of purpose pursuit. The tragedy isn't that you're making mistakes. The tragedy is that you're no longer moving. A frozen life can look respectable from the outside, but the bills get paid, work gets done, the routine stays intact, but internally, there's no expansion, no stretching, no evolution, no becoming, just maintenance, just survival, just existing. And survival mode was never meant to become a permanent address. Many people leave prison physically, but continue operating from a prison mentality emotionally. Not because they're criminals, not because they're bad people, but because they've trained themselves to minimize risk at all costs. In prison, drawing attention can be dangerous, right? Taking chances can be dangerous. Trusting people can be dangerous. We all know the story. Standing out can be dangerous within the prison environment. Sometimes survival solely depends upon keeping your head down. But what keeps you alive in one season can slowly destroy you in another season. The same protective habits that help you survive difficult environments can become obstacles to growth when you're finally free. The walls disappear, the routines change, the opportunities start coming to you, but internally, you're still operating from yesterday's survival mode. And that's where stagnation begins. Another lie avoidance tells us is this. It says time will heal it. We've all heard it. Just give it time. Time heals all wounds. But that's only partially true. Time heals properly treated wounds. Time does not heal neglected wounds. Imagine breaking your leg and you don't go to treatment. You don't set the bone. You don't see a doctor. You don't do physical therapy. You simply sit on the couch and wait. Do you think time would heal that injury? Maybe not. But it will likely heal incorrectly. The damage would remain. Mobility might even suffer. Pain will linger. The wound would simply become permanent. Now, emotional wounds operate the same way. Broken trust doesn't heal because months pass, or the trauma doesn't just go away because calendars change. Those relationships don't get better because birthdays uh, come and go. Guilt doesn't heal because another year arrives. Healing requires participation, it requires intervention, it needs uncomfortable action. It also needs honesty and accountability. But moreover, it needs courage. Waiting for time to fix what only effort can repair is not patience. It's basically negligence. It's like if you sit on the couch with that broken bone, you're neglecting the chance to heal. And sometimes it's selfishness because while we're waiting for some time to solve our problems, other people continue carrying the consequences of our silence. That child may continue waiting for the conversation to finally happen, or your significant other. They'll continue carrying the hurt if you don't address something. The friend continues wondering why we disappeared. The community continues suffering from our absence. The younger generation continues lacking the wisdom we could share. And I'm going to address youth violence in the next episode, so definitely check that out. What I'm saying is our silence affects people, our inactivity affects people, our avoidance affects people. And that's what passive people often fail to understand. We tend to think that inactivity is neutral. We think we're only responsible for what we do. But maturity teaches us something different. It teaches us a lesson that we sometimes want to avoid. Sometimes we we we're also responsible for what we refuse to do. That's the lesson. The apology that we never get, the truth we never tell, the opportunity we never pursue, and even the person we never encourage, the wrong we never ever confront. Every one of those choices creates consequences. And over time, those consequences extend beyond us because stagnation is never a private experience. It spreads. Like water leaking behind the wall, it eventually impacts everything connected to it. That's why personal growth is not simply a self improvement project, it's an act of stewardship. The people around you deserve the healthiest version of you. Your children deserve it. Your spouse or significant other deserves it. Your community deserves it. Your future deserves it. And most of all, you deserve it. Which brings us to a difficult realization. Whenever we remain passive, the damage doesn't just stop with us. Our silence creates ripple effects. Our avoidance creates ripple effects. Our refusal to act creates ripple effects. And those effects often become the very harms we claim that we're trying to avoid. And that's where we're headed next because the cost of moral silence is far greater than most people realize, right? There's a lie that passive people often tell themselves. They often tell themselves this lie. And this lie is so common that entire communities have built their identities around it. And the lie sounds like this: at least I'm not hurting anybody. It sounds reasonable. It's even fair. It even sounds responsible and mature. But if we dig beneath the surface, we discover something uncomfortable. Sometimes the greatest harm isn't what you actively do. Sometimes the greatest harm is what you refuse to do. Let's talk about that silence, not the healthy kind, not the silence of reflection or meditation or listening to your higher power. I'm talking about moral silence, the silence that appears when something needs to be said, that appears when something needs to be confronted or done. It's the silence that appears when action is required, but fear convinces us to stay seated. Many people assume neutrality is harmless. I mean, let's think about the age of social media. And I really hate it when I see um, prison, people have phones or whatnot in the prison and they're filming someone getting beat down, someone getting stabbed, or someone getting hurt. Or even out in society, you can see where there are fights being recorded. Somebody's literally about to lose their life and people are just bystanders. They assume staying out of the conflict makes them innocent. But history tells a different story. Every major injustice that has ever existed survived because good people remain silent long enough for bad things to become normal. It's just like in society today. Bad things have become normal. Harm doesn't continue because evil people are powerful. Harm continues because passive people are comfortable. Think back to like the civil rights movement. A lot of good unquote people, good quote unquote good unquote people, they figured like, yeah, everyone should have fair rights. Everyone should have equal justice, right? However, they did nothing. And society as a whole took it as, hey, it's okay. Now that's a hard pill to swallow because most of us don't want to see ourselves as villains. We're not the ones committing the offense. We're not the ones creating the damage. We're not the ones causing the pain. However, if we witness harm and consistently refuse to engage, eventually our silence begins serving the very thing we claim to oppose. This isn't just true on a societal level. It's true in families too. It's true in friendships. It's true in marriages and entire communities. And this is especially true in reentry. How many families remain fractured because someone refuses to have a difficult conversation? How many children carry wounds because a parent never addressed the hurt? How many friendships quietly died because pride prevented reconciliation? I can I don't know how many communities struggle because capable people remain spectators instead of participants. Silence has consequences, and the longer silence lasts, the louder those consequences become. And the most difficult realities for formerly incarcerated individuals, and honestly for anyone carrying a painful past, is understanding that simply stopping the harmful behavior is rarely enough for the people who are affected. That's not because they are unforgiving, it's because damage creates a vacuum, and vacuums don't fill themselves. Imagine someone punching a hole in the wall, right? Years later, they stop punching. I ain't gonna punch the hole. I ain't gonna punch walls no more. Okay, great. You don't punch walls no more. You don't punch holes in the wall. But the hole is still there. The family still sees it. The room still carries it. The damage remains visible. Now imagine that same person saying, why won't everyone move on? I haven't punched the wall in years. Well, the answer is simple because the absence of new damage doesn't automatically repair old damage. That's where many people get lost in the sauce. They become frustrated because they measure growth by their intentions while others measure growth by their impact. You know what victims often hear all the time from, people that committed crimes against them? I've changed. I've really changed. You know what they're often wondering when you say I've changed? Then why haven't I seen it? Those are two entirely different conversations. A person may genuinely feel remorse. A child may still feel abandoned. A spouse may still feel betrayed. A friend may still feel forgotten. A community may still feel neglected, and those feelings don't disappear simply because time has passed. This is where the good, passive, good person myth completely collapses because passive goodness demands recognition without demonstration. You got to say to yourself, trust me because I'm different now. But active redemption, it says, watch me because I am different now. One asks for belief, the other provides evidence. And it takes work, it takes consistency, it takes sacrifice, it takes time. That's why genuine remorse is not measured by emotion, it's measured by effort. You can cry about your mistakes all day. You can feel guilty about your mistakes until your face turn blue. But you can even regret your mistakes. But until your actions begin creating restoration, the people you hurt may struggle to recognize your transformation. And honestly, it's completely fair because trust isn't built through like declarations or putting on a good show. I was trying to say decorations, but it's declarations. It isn't built on just saying it. It's rebuilt through demonstrations. This is especially important in today's culture where performative accountability has become common. Everybody knows how to apologize publicly. Everybody knows how to post motivational quotes. Everybody knows how to announce their growth. But far fewer people are willing to quietly do the difficult work of rebuilding credibility one action at a time. Real redemption is really boring for real. It shows up. It means showing up consistently, like keeping your promises and making amends. All that boring stuff. It's serving when nobody actually says, "Hey, thank you for serving." It's helping when nobody notices. It's sacrificing when nobody rewards you. The passive good person wants forgiveness without participation. And hopefully that's not you. Or if it is you, by the time you finish this episode and you think about it and rue on what has been said, that you actually become active in your redemption story. You know, we have those people that understand that healing requires involvement, not because they owe perfection, but because they owe effort. And this applies beyond personal relationships. Just look around your community. How many problems continue because everyone assumes somebody else will address them? How many young people are waiting, just waiting for mentors? Or how many struggling families near you are waiting for support? Or how many isolated individuals are waiting for someone to simply care enough to engage them? Passivity creates vacancies, vacancies of leadership, vacancies of compassion, vacancies of courage, vacancies of accountability. And whenever good people leave those spaces empty, something else eventually fills them. That's why moral silence is never neutral. It always produces something. It either allows healing to advance or permits dysfunction to survive. And once you understand that, a powerful question will emerge. If simply avoiding harm isn't enough, if silence isn't enough, if regret isn't enough, then what is enough? What does active redemption actually look like? What does accountability beyond words actually require? How do we move from apology to legacy? And that's where we're about to get into next, guys. Because redemption begins when you stop asking, how do I prove I've changed? And start asking yourself, what am I willing to build because I have changed? That's the foundation of active redemption, right? Now, to build this active redemption, you got to have something to stand on. So now we've arrived at a question. What do you stand on? What separates passive goodness from genuine transformation? If staying out of trouble isn't enough, if silence isn't enough, if regret isn't enough, then what does redemption actually look like? What is the building blocks of acting? What are the building blocks of active redemption? Redemption isn't a feeling, guys. It's structure. It's something you build. brick by brick, pillar by pillar, choice by choice, day by day. Most people think redemption begins with an apology. And to be fair, apologies do matter. Apologies can open doors, apologies can acknowledge harm, apologies can even create opportunities for healing. But apologies are just part of the foundation. They're not buildings. Far too many people mistake the groundbreaking ceremony for the completed construction project. They apologize and then expect immediate restoration. They say, sorry, and then expect people to just trust them. They admit the wrongdoing and expect reconciliation. But redemption asks a harder question. What happens after the apology? What That's where most people disappear. They just shrink back into their hole because apologies cost words, but redemption costs action. Apologies can take a few minutes, but true redemption takes years, right? They have to be practical, not emotional. And this practical transformation requires sacrifice. That's the part people don't like talking about. We love the language of grace. We love the language of forgiveness. We love the language of second chances. But very few people talk about the price of rebuilding because the reality is this: anything worth repairing will require effort. If you've damaged trust, rebuilding trust requires consistency. If you've damaged relationships, rebuilding those relationships will require some presence. If you even damaged your reputation, rebuilding your reputation requires reliability. And if you've done damage to your community, rebuilding your standing requires service. There's no shortcut, there's no life hack, there's no motivational quote powerful enough to bypass the work. You simply have to build. And one of the greatest lessons I learned after, being, given my freedom back, my physical freedom back, was understanding that people didn't need my explanations. They needed my consistency. Think about it. Most of us want to explain our transformation. We want people to understand our intentions. We want them to see our heart or appreciate our growth. But people can't live inside your intentions. They can't live inside your heart. They can only experience your actions. Your family experiences your actions, your children, your coworkers, everyone around you experiences your actions, including your community. Your actions become the evidence of your transformation, and evidence creates credibility. That's why active redemption begins with a mindset shift. Stop asking, how do I convince people I've changed? Stop asking yourself, just stop it. And start asking yourself, how do I become undeniably different? Those are completely different objectives. One seeks validation, the other one seeks transformation. One of them focuses on perceptions. How do I look? While the other focuses on substance, on what can I do myself to repair what I've done. And substance is what ultimately matters. One of the most important frameworks I talk about in the books is what I call the four pillars of active redemption. The first pillar is ownership. No excuses, no minimizing, no blame shifting, no rewriting history. You own what happened fully, completely, without conditions. Ownership is powerful because it removes the energy we spend protecting our ego. The second pillar is restoration. And this is where you ask yourself, what can be repaired? Because let's be honest, not everything can be fixed. Not every relationship can be restored. Not every wound can be healed exactly as it was before. But what can be repaired deserves your effort. And the third pillar is service. This is where redemption begins creating value beyond yourself. Your pain becomes wisdom. Your mistakes become lessons. Basically, by mentoring, your failures become guidance. You stop asking how to escape your past and start asking how your past can help someone else avoid similar mistakes. And that's where purpose often emerges. The fourth pillar is consistency. Pretty simple. We talk about this all the time because one good day proves nothing. One emotional moment proves absolutely nothing. Transformation is measured over time. It's measured in repeated actions. repeated integrity, repeated discipline, repeated presence, repeated sacrifice, repeated growth. That's how credibility is built. And here's where many people miss what it should be the obvious. Active redemption is not punishment, it's purpose. The goal isn't to spend the rest of your life paying for your mistakes. The goal is to spend the rest of your life creating value despite your mistakes. Those are two different mindsets. One produces shame, the other one produces growth. Now, one of them, you can let it keep you chained down to yesterday, or let the other empower you to build tomorrow. This is one of the reasons why I continue to write and why I created this platform. Not because I have all the answers, not because I've perfected the process, but because I've learned that transformation isn't an event, it's a daily practice. Every day presents a choice. Will I drift backward into passivity, or will I intentionally move forward? That's a decision all of us must make repeatedly, because redemption isn't maintained just through good intentions. It's maintained through deliberate action. And the beautiful thing about active redemption is that it creates momentum. Every promise keeps, every promise that you keep will build your confidence. Every act of service will build a sense of purpose. Every difficult conversation that you have actually will build the courage for you to have the next conversation. Every sacrifice builds character. And eventually, something happens. You stop being known for what you did, and you start being known for what you build. You start being defined by the worst chapter in your life. And you start being recognized for your current contribution. Stop surviving your past. Transform your future. That's when all of this will come full circle, when accountability becomes tangible. That's when the growth will become undeniable. And this is exactly where we need to go right now, right? Because active redemption isn't just about repairing damage, it's about creating legacy. It's about becoming a person whose presence leaves things better than they found them. And that's the final challenge, moving beyond survival, moving beyond apology, moving beyond restoration, and stepping fully into a life of intentional impact. Now, that's how a legacy is forged. Now, speaking of legacy, we got to go ahead and bring it all home here, because we talked about the false piece of inactivity. We've exposed the stagnation of having that avoidant mindset. We even confronted the hidden cost of moral silence and explored what it takes to build active redemption. Now we're standing at the final crossroads, because at some point, every person listening right now, you got to answer this question: what are you building with the time you have left? Not what mistakes you have stop making, but what are you building with the time you have left? Not the trouble that you stayed out of or managed to avoid, not what bad habits you've conquered. What are you building right now with the time that you have left? Because the truth is, nobody gets remembered for what they avoided. And another hard truth: no one lasts forever. No one lives forever. Think about it. Nobody going to stand at your funeral and say, he was incredible. He avoided a lot of problems. Amazing. Just stayed out of trouble for 20 years. He never really did nothing wrong. That's not legacy. That just means you maintain it. Legacy is built through presence. Legacy is built through contribution. Legacy is built through participation. It's built through showing up. And the passive good person struggles with this because they spent so much time running from their past that they never learn how to run toward the future. And that's a trap. Many people become professional escape artists. They spend years trying to outrun shame, outrun guilt, be faster than a regret, outrun old labels, outrun old versions of themselves. But eventually, you got to realize something. You can't build a meaningful future while spending all your energy fleeing yesterday. At some point, the direction has to change. At some point, survival must become construction. At some point, avoidance must become action. All of this is going to require your presence, not perfection, presence. Okay. I want to clear something up right now before we close out the episode. And that the goal is not to become flawless. Nothing's perfect. No one's perfect. The goal is not to become some motivational superhero. The goal is not to pretend you've never struggled. It's not trying to erase your story and nothing like that. The goal is to become present enough to use your story for something greater than yourself. That's where real transformation lives. I think about the people I've met throughout this journey, men and women who served decades behind bars, people society wrote off, people who were told they would never amount to nothing, people who carried labels heavier than most people can even, in their wildest dreams, nightmares they couldn't even imagine. And yet, some of those same individuals are now mentoring you, starting businesses, leading nonprofits, building families, serving communities, creating opportunities for others, changing laws, saving lives, changing the narrative. And why are they doing this? Because they stopped focusing exclusively on what they had escaped and started focusing on what they could create. That's legacy. Legacy isn't perfection. Legacy is impact. And impact begins with one decision, just one. Not 10, not 100, not 1,000, just one. One decision. One area where you've been passive. One area where you've been silent or where you've been avoiding responsibility. You got to stop convincing yourself that doing nothing is somehow the safest choice. Now, I want you to identify it right now. Maybe it's a phone call you've been avoiding. Maybe it's an apology you've delayed. Maybe it's a business you refuse to start. Maybe it's a dream you buried or a relationship that needs attention. Maybe it's a younger person who just needs your guidance. Maybe it's your health. Maybe it's your faith. Whatever it is, identify it. And then ask yourself the question that changes everything. What bold action can I take this week? Not next year, not someday, not when conditions are perfect, but what action can I take this week? Because action breaks stagnation. Action destroys excuses. Action creates momentum and exposes the fear. It reveals the growth. It transforms your identity. The passive good person waits for certainty. The actively redeemed person moves with conviction, and that's a huge difference. One spends life preparing, while the other spends life participating. And participation changes people. Every meaningful thing in your life came from participation. Everything, relationships, friendships, parenthood, business, work, faith, purpose, community, growth. None of those things happen because you stood still. They happen because you engaged, because you showed up, because you became present. The same is true for redemption. It isn't a destination you arrive at. It's a daily decision to engage, to contribute, to serve, to build, to show up every day, consistently, even when it's uncomfortable. Oh, especially when it's uncomfortable. That's why I often tell people that freedom isn't the absence of change. Freedom isn't Freedom is the presence of purpose. You can be physically free and spiritually stagnant. You can be physically free and emotionally trapped. You can be free physically, but mentally passive. But when purpose enters the picture, something shifts. You stop measuring your life by what you survive and start measuring it by what you're actually creating. Stop counting your failures. Start counting your contributions. Stop asking, well, why did this happen to me? And instead ask yourself, what can I do with what happened to me? That's the question that builds legacies. That's the question that changes families. That's the question that transforms communities. And that's the question that separates passive goodness from active integrity. So as we close today, I want to challenge the Conviction Collective this week. Identify one area of passivity. One, then take one bold action. Maybe just making a call, sending an email, or starting an application for your LLC. Join a program, volunteer your time, just tell your story, offer forgiveness, seek forgiveness. Just take the first step because doing nothing is not redemption. Changing the narrative is about actively becoming involved in the legacy of your life. Thanks for joining.